Well, yeah, I think it's quite likely that the future energy systems will be or need to be balanced between these kinds of large-scale infrastructural sorts of developments like grids, like the supply of bottled gas or perhaps gas networks in certain situations, things that require large technical infrastructure. But certainly this will be the case at the very least in rural parts of sub-Saharan Africa, where it doesn't make any kind of economic sense to be putting in that kind of infrastructure, because the demand for the energy service would be very small. It matters a great deal to the particular people who are using the energy service, but in terms of a business, it's not very attractive. So decentralized, off-grid, perhaps standalone in some cases, perhaps mini-grids of a kind, a whole bunch of different sorts of potential solutions are possible and perhaps attractive. I think it's very difficult to say, it's probably in a way foolish to say there is a particular model or a particular balance. And actually one of the things that I suppose we would argue at least is that we need to be building in developing countries the capabilities I mentioned before around skills and knowledge, and the systems that can make use of skills and knowledge and help to develop them further, such that developing countries and at the national level, at subnational level, can actually make those decisions themselves. They know they have the skills, the abilities and the systems in place that they can make the kinds of choices and decisions that seem appropriate for a particular context in which the solution is going to be implemented. So it's not a case of, there should be X% of off-grid and X% of grid, etc. It's about local contexts and what makes sense in those contexts, and if it's going to be successful, sustainable, then at the very least there need to be local skills developed in order to be able to make those kinds of decisions. So we would we would argue very strongly that capabilities, technical, even sort of policy implementation, and various other kinds of skills, investment skills and so on, as well as the systems in which the people can apply those skills, need to be in place, so that national governments and down to subnational levels, there is the ability to actually decide what needs to be done, working perhaps with the private sector, other stakeholders and so on, to plan where planning is useful, to let markets do their work wherever that's suitable, and there simply isn't a kind of a blueprint approach possible, because the context varies so much, and the problems vary so much, and so on and so on. So it's really about, we would suggest, about skills being available and the systems in which those skills can be applied being in place, that can then evolve the solutions that are appropriate to the situation. I personally believe that it's right that is actually part of the solution, is about the poor being central to the problem solving, and that's partially because they can articulate their needs better than anybody else can. But if you are, I was talking with somebody earlier on about, with an engineer, talking about designing engineering solutions or technical solutions. It's very difficult for an engineer to know what solutions would be appropriate or useful or whatever that would actually meet the needs of the poor. So at least in the very simplest form, if the poor are able to articulate their needs in a way that helps to develop technical solutions, then that must be at least one step, if you like, on a pathway that is going to be more beneficial to the poor. How to do that? I mean, there's now quite a long history, I think, of participatory approaches to development, but they haven't necessarily been taken up in the sort of technical fields particularly strongly. I think there are probably some examples where good examples of where that has happened, but in general that's not the case, and it's very difficult to pinpoint what the reasons are for that, but it may be a little bit to do with the kind of development of technologies and then looking for applications rather than looking at the problems and working back, as it were, to developing the technologies that can help solve those problems. And of course, technology itself is only part of the solution. I mean, it's been mentioned here at the conference, there are behavioural aspects, there are cultural aspects, there are political aspects, there are power relations. It can be very difficult. We've just heard a long discussion about fossil fuel subsidies, and you think about who benefits from those fossil fuel subsidies is essentially the fossil fuel industry. And they have huge political power, economic and political power, and so to be able to remove those subsidies is a very difficult challenge. The poor, of course, don't have anything like that kind of power. So how do we create an environment in which those kinds of changes can take place? The poor will be part of that, but there'll also be other, I think, a need for other actors, and actually something else that's come out of, I think, or come through very clearly in the discussions here, is that participation is not just about the poor, it's about many different stakeholders. But clearly, if we're interested in solving the problems that the poor face, they need to be a central part of that multi-stakeholder participation.